talking about grace. And in reality, why else would we be here? Have you ever read through the Gospels and thought to yourself, there's one word that I haven't really seen Jesus use that often. He said lots of things and he addressed lots of issues, but how often did Jesus say grace? Not say grace over a meal, I'm sure that happened many times. How often did Jesus preach a sermon on grace? And those of you who got the bulletin and saw that today we were talking about Jesus' sermon on grace and did your homework, you probably went to Matthew 1, started reading and got right through to the end of John and thought, oh, where is that sermon on grace? People who've done the count tell us that Jesus didn't really ever preach a recorded sermon on grace. And if we read through the Gospels, depending on what translation you've got, the word grace appears, say, 4 times. On the other hand, law is mentioned hundreds of times. I think if we were in a theatre this morning rather than church, they probably would have roped off the outside wings and tried to fill the centre. But I won't ask anybody to move. I can't stand still anyway, so I can pace around and look at all of you. You'll just think it's an idiosyncrasy, but really I'm just including you. So welcome. I want to do 3 things today in the time that I've got. I want to talk about one thing, grace. I want to do that in 2 ways. Reflect on Jesus and what he said and did then. And the other way is to reflect on us now and find relevance for those stories. And at the end, as you go out into the world and into the new week and into the unknown, I want to give you 3 words to take with you. A couple of things about Jesus and the Gospels. First thing, relating to grace. Jesus showed up. Jesus came as he promised. Sometime or other in the near future, I want to go to the cinema and see the new movie on Shackleton. Because I've always found Shackleton an amazing man, an incredible leader, and the story of his expeditions is incredible. This is the little part, you've probably heard this reflection a number of times, but just a reminder for this morning, their ship had been caught in the ice and crushed. The wood of the boat had been destroyed and the men had escaped and eventually got to a place called Elephant Island. And why, kids, do you think it was called Elephant? Why do you think it was called Elephant Island? Do you think there were elephants there? It's very quiet this morning. Do you think it was shaped like an elephant? On the rocky beaches was the habitat for elephant seals, those rather magnificent large creatures. And it's the seals that sustained these guys who'd been saved from their ship for a long time because there wasn't much else to eat. They cooked up seaweed, they caught seals, they caught penguins, all the things that we wouldn't do. They did. They're on Elephant Island and they know that it's not on any of the sailing routes, no trade routes, it's not going anywhere. They will be there until they find a way off. And the way they do it is to take a little boat, one of the ship's boats that they had with them, the James Caird. It was 7 metres long. That means that this boat would fit into this space behind me quite easily. And they lashed a mast of another boat to it to make it stronger, and 6 men sailed on the gigantic southern seas, winter waves above them, waves beside them, troughs below them. They sailed, I've written it down, 1,300 kilometres before they came to South Georgia, another island. They were heading for South Georgia because it was inhabited. They knew there was a whaling station there, that supply ships would come, that whalers would come and go. But when they got there, they were on the wrong side of the island, and they were the first to go up the glaciers, over the mountains, down the other side into the whaling station. These are men who are exhausted from an expedition on the ice, exhausted from sailing 1,300 kilometres in an open boat on the freezing and raging sea, but they got there. And they eventually managed to talk, I think it was the Chilean government. Anyway, they got a boat and they went back to Elephant Island. The amazing thing is that when they got there, everyone was ready. One of the guys who'd been left had said for many days, for months, pack up, get ready, because today may well be the day that the boss comes back. And this day, as the heavy mist lifted, they saw the ship off the coast, and they saw the boss and the other guys rowing in. And within an hour, before the clouds came down and covered everything again, they were off. When Jesus came, they didn't say any day the boss could be back, get ready, but there was a messenger. And the messenger said, listen, I bring you good news, news of great joy, news that will affect all people everywhere. And he went on to say, a liberator has been born. The translation I'm using this morning is The Voice, and it's currently my preferred translation. A bit contemporary, a bit scholarly, a nice blend. A liberator has been born for you. And then the choir, as we know, and as we reflect on Christmas, on earth, peace among all people. All people. So what's the relevance of that little story? It's this. We too can show up when and where needed. We can be there when things go wrong, when others think all is lost. We can change things for people. We can show them what peace means and what peace is like. Grace means that Jesus came, and despite everything, whatever else happens, that is the good news. That's the gospel. The second thing I want to reflect on this morning that Jesus did was to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. And if you were in the well a couple of weeks ago, we looked at Jesus' manifesto and this first sermon of his, and we emphasised the theme for the well this year, love is the movement. And if you get to go to some of those meetings through the year, that should be very rewarding and refreshing and informing for you. But Jesus' first sermon wasn't really about helping handicapped people or giving relief to the poor. What he was doing was describing each and every one of us. We are the ones who are poor. We are the needy ones. We are the bankrupt. We're the ones that need divine life and righteousness. We are all prisoners of sin. We are the captives. But Jesus came to declare the year of Jubilee. And because Jesus came, we, the captives, can return home to where we belong, to where there is rest, where there is safety and security and peace. In the year of Jubilee, all slaves were freed. And again, that's us. We're bound, aren't we? We're tied up, we're lost in a mess until we find truth. And after that, we are free indeed. Jesus' first sermon, slaves and prisoners will be free, debts will be forgiven, the mercies of God will be manifest. He didn't say, I want to talk about grace, but that's exactly what he was doing. The relevance for us, we too can value rest. It's the theme at the heart of Jubilee. The heart of Jubilee. We can work towards providing escape from bondage. We can help others find freedom. We can change things for other people. We can show what Jubilee and freedom and liberation should be like. Because grace means that Jesus liberates, and despite everything, that's good news. That is the gospel. And you knew, of course, I'd be going here because Jesus' stories are at the heart of the collection of events that make up the Gospels. And Jesus' stories were about grace. And those of you who have time to reflect and go back and look at things, think about this as a premise. Jesus preached law to the self-righteous. But ordinary folks got stories of grace. The parables weren't simply morality tales. There was no catch, no demand for penitence, no lesson to be written down and learned. The stories were really about getting out of jail free. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, is like a merchant searching for pearls. No price is too great. You know the story. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, is like treasure that's been taken and hidden and buried in a field. And no search to find it is too difficult. You know the story. The lost coin did nothing to be found. The lost sheep did not rescue itself. It wasn't about the intensity of the struggle. The prodigal son didn't deserve the reception that he got when he returned. Jesus' stories leave us always with a lasting impression of undeserved, unmerited favour, unexpected grace. He came for us because in his eyes we are the treasure. We are the pearl. And they leave us as the prodigal when he returned, speechless, in awe, amazed. That's the response to grace. That's understanding the loving arms of the Father. It's what grace is all about. The relevance for us then, simply this: we can live that love that Jesus talked about. We can be the ones that never give up on people, never look for excuses, always persistent, including every person, creating equality where there has been none. We can change things for other people. We can show what God's love means. Grace means that Jesus sought out each of us individually and together. And despite everything, that is the good news. And that's the gospel. Jesus showed unconditional forgiveness. It seems that when Jesus was talking to those who were caught up in an understanding of the importance of law, there were conditions. But on the street, Jesus revealed forgiveness that had no conditions. The comparison is interesting. Think of the story of the man who couldn't get to Jesus, but his friends could. And they actually couldn't get into where Jesus was, but they had a plan, and they cut a hole in the roof, and they let their friend down on a mat. And Jesus' words should be ringing in your ears. Rest assured, my son, your sins are forgiven. Not might be, or not will be if you do these things, but your sins are forgiven you. A similar story, there was the woman who followed Jesus into Simon's house. A woman whose reputation was not as great or as impressive as theirs. A woman who was subject to their judgment because of her social class, because of her behaviour, because of what they saw. But Jesus said, same, your sins are forgiven. And it was the same for the whole world, you and I, when Jesus was there hanging on the cross. Forgiveness, even at the very worst of times. Before the cross, and we're tempted to say the same ourselves, you forgive and you'll be forgiven. You be kind, people will be kind to you. Be generous, others will be generous to you. Forgive and you'll be forgiven. But at the cross and beyond, it is unconditional forgiveness. And that is the most liberating manifestation of grace that there is. Because once we get things in the right order, when we know that we've been forgiven, when we acknowledge God's love for us, then we can forgive others. It's not a condition. May well be a consequence. Don't get them back to front. The relevance for us, pretty simple. We can show what it means to forgive. We can restore and we can revive people rather than give them our judgment and tell them what we think. We can change things for others. We can show them what God forgives really means. Grace means that Jesus has sought out each of us. And despite everything, that is the good news. That is the gospel. What does grace demand of us? Some would say everything. Others would say nothing. And it's a worthwhile discussion to have. But here's Jesus sitting down with a wise man, Nicodemus, a wise man who recognises that Jesus' wisdom is far greater than his. And Jesus says this, God expressed his love for the world in this way. He gave his only Son so that whoever believes in him will not face destruction, but will have everlasting life. Think about the Old Covenant. There's hundreds of chapters full of duties and obligations and responses that you need to have, things that you need to do. But here in the New Covenant, there is one thing asked of you. Simply to believe. That's how amazing grace is. Jesus came to open blind eyes, to set captives free, to give us new life. And all that he asks is that we receive the very thing that he came to give. It's the only thing that grace will ever ask of you. Receive, accept, liberation, rest, jubilee. Jesus is grace. It's almost the same thing. When we talk about Jesus, we can't avoid digging deeper into our understanding of grace. To know his love is to know grace. They're inseparable. God is gracious because God is love. And that's what he came to bring us, that good news. Reflect on the stories we've discussed this morning. Reflect on the whole gospel theme. Jesus healed people who were sinners without first requiring that they clean up their act. Only afterwards did he suggest that they go and sin no more. Only afterwards did he encourage that they might turn their life around. He went to a dinner party with drunk gluttons. He sat down with prostitutes. Do you think he was there sermonising, theologising, telling them how their lives need to change, what dirty, rotten scoundrels they were? Well, we don't know what he said at those conversations and those meals, but we know what the onlookers said about him being there, so it seems unlikely that Jesus was being pious or aloof. The clearest case of grace, the simplest understanding of the get-out-of-jail-free card that you've got, is what Jesus said in John 3 when he was talking to Nicodemus. It's not based on what you've done. It's not based on how worthy you think you might be, or the lifestyle that you've chosen for yourself, or the theology that you've adopted, but it's based solely on belief in him. And that's it. That's grace straight from Jesus' mouth. That's the red letter explanation. That's the definition of the Gospels for grace. And that's the take-home theme for today. That's your get-out-of-jail free card. Here's 3 words from Jesus. Notice the tense. It is finished. It is finished. The gospel of grace is good news. Once prisoners, we have been released. Once blind, we can now see and see clearly. Once debtors, we are now free. Because of Jesus, we are able, and here's our last 3 words for this morning, go in peace.